quotes that I'm going to read to you from this morning are from a book that I'm working on, and it's in chapter 4, entitled Mercy. Jan read this chapter and said it's very intense. You remember that? It's very intense. But chapter 6 of Psalms is a very small part of it. But the word mercy is used throughout the Bible. In fact, it is used in ways which clearly indicate that it is a biblical principle. Mercy is a biblical principle because it is an attribute of God. Being an attribute of God means that He has the authority to give it, the desire to give it, should He so choose, the discernment to give it, and regardless of the outcome as we see it, it will be perfect in its application. As we are created in His image, mercy is an attribute we have and we are expected to show. I might add that without the love of Christ in one's life, the desire to show mercy is somewhat foreign. In this case, it may come down to selfishly determining what is best for me. If that means showing mercy for another, then we show it. Otherwise, we withhold it. It's not mercy at all. It's more how it affects you. This chapter deals with the pleading to God for mercy using examples from the Bible as they apply to our daily lives. Sometimes it applies to people who have put their faith in God. Now, this is talking about mercy in this book that I'm writing about. But sometimes mercy applies to people who have put their faith in God, and therefore they have every expectation that He will hear their plea and consider it. That's what we've been talking about. People that are believers and have put their faith in God know that He will hear them and will answer them. People that have not put their faith in Him think they're going to hear Him and answer them just because of who they are. And we've already read many times that if they don't know Him, He's not going to hear them and He's not going to answer them. If they don't come to Him with a repentant heart, it's like in one ear and out the other for God. All right. Psalm 6, let me read Psalm verse 1. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. The other psalm we're going to study today is Psalm 38. Verse 1 of Psalm 38 is exactly like verse 1 of Psalm 6. Okay? What David requires of God is the same thing we require in such situations. I'm going to do these out of order. Let me read verse 3. My soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord, how long? King David found himself in a situation where his soul is in anguish, probably one where some sin has entered the picture. The soul is that part of our existence which is deeper than the mind, deeper than the heart. We talked about that. It's the word nephesh is what it's used in the Bible. And it's the word that is used for what we became when God breathed the breath of life into us. We became a living being. That Hebrew word that's translated from is the nephesh. It is the type of anguish, it's deeper than the heart. This anguish we're talking about is the type of anguish that comes when consequences of sin start to roll in. David shows his actions, whatever they are, have opened himself up to rebuke and or discipline from God, but he is pleading with God to withhold both. Okay, now let's back up. Verse 2. Verse 2 says, be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am faint. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are in agony. Anguish is severe mental agony. Anguish doesn't sound like a good word for us to be in. Maybe even to the point of causing physical pain. That is exactly what has happened. He is faint, and even his bones ache. David even goes so far as to ask for healing. The thing that I find particularly interesting in this request is the Hebrew word used for healing is Raphi, R-A-P-H-E. This is the word used in connection with Yahweh Raphi. I used to say Jehovah Raphi, but I'm never going to say that again because Jehovah's not in the Bible. Yahweh Raphi, meaning God who heals. You could read many times through the King James in particular and see Yahweh Raphi when it's used in connection with God healing. You see it so many times to refer to God's ability and his willingness to heal. When we stop to consider it, all healing is intended to be merciful. I'm going to read that verse again. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am faint. O Lord, for my bones are in agony. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are in agony. So he's asking for mercy and he's asking for healing. Those two things go together in this case in particular. So we go to verse 1. I'm going backwards here, starting at verse 3. But verse 1 says, O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. What David requires of God is the same thing we require in such situations. Forego rebuke and discipline and grant mercy. If I am convicted of my sin, a lot of times I'm sinful and I don't do anything about it. But there are sometimes when you're actually deeply convicted of it, and you feel like you're gonna undergo the rebuke and discipline from God. What do you really want? You want mercy. What you really want him to do is just look the other way. Just forget about it. You know, I'm owning up to it. I've got a repentant heart, and I want to be forgiven of it. I don't want rebuke and discipline. What is discipline? Oh, we need to get that word straight. That's an interesting word for me. What is discipline? It is. It is. It's a form of punishment. But it's not. It is punishment, as a matter of fact. But it's a special kind of punishment. Discipline is what your father did to you when you were growing up. Not as punishment, but as a special kind of punishment that is to make you a better person. It's a teaching tool. It's discipline. Think of going to jail, okay? You got two kinds of things that you can look at going to jail to accomplish. One is discipline. The other is judgment. If you go to jail and you are so evil, wicked, bad, mean, and nasty that you are never going to change, and you have a life sentence with a possibility of parole, but you're never getting out, that is judgment. But if you look at it as opportunity for parole comes along, that means you look at this discipline as something that has given you, what's the word, Jan? Rehabilitation. You experience punishment with the hope of rehabilitation. God gives us, for believers, he disciplines us with love in hopes of drawing us back to him. That's what discipline is, biblical discipline. It's in the hopes of you coming back. When the Jews, the Israelites, went through the Babylonian exile. It was called discipline. It's also called punishment. It's also called judgment. But the rock bottom meaning of it was discipline. They were disciplined, God was wanting them to come back to Him. And that's what that was all about. Okay, so we're going to talk about that more in chapter 38. But what David wants to say is, give me another chance, I'll do better next time. This may be the wrong way to approach God, for we should always be striving for improvement, even in times of anguish and stress. We should be asking for more faith so that we can be trusting God more than before. So that's what he's asking for. He says he's expecting rebuke and discipline, but I would rather forego that in place of to receive mercy instead. But he gets both. I mean, we get, as believers, we get rebuke and discipline, but we also get mercy. We never get what we really deserve with God. He's always extending his arm and his love toward us. All right, verse 4. We're down to verse 4. Verse 4 says, "Turn, O Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love." Now, that word unfailing love is one of those terms that just seems to keep coming up. David appeals to God's unfailing love for his deliverance and mercy. As mercy, grace, and love are usually bound together, mercy, grace, and love are usually bound together, grace most likely is included in this request. In the request David is making. He knows God is gracious, and he makes his appeal to that side of God. This is almost the same as for the sake of his name. Remember what we've read 2 or 3 times now, a reference to, for the sake of his name, God is going to do something. What was that all about? Because of his reputation. His attributes say, I'm a certain way, and if I don't demonstrate those attributes, then it affects my reputation. So God is completely consistent with all the attributes associated with his name. This doesn't say for the sake of his name, but look what he says. He appeals to him on the basis of his unfailing love. He knows God will respond to him with unfailing love because that's his attribute. He knows he can count on that. Okay, verse 5. No one remembers you when he is dead. Who praises you from the grave? It's kind of an interesting verse. He also thinks that God is moving so slow in dealing with him that he will probably be dead before he gets an answer. That's pretty slow, Wayne. When we ask things of God, he never seems to move fast enough for us, right? When we're asking, what do we want? I need it now, God, or I wouldn't be asking. If I need it next week, I'll ask next week. Okay? He never seems to move fast enough for us. We sin quickly, and sometimes the associated consequences come quickly, but we also want God's response to our request to come quickly and in the manner and with the solution we desire. I want you to act on my behalf, and here's what I want you to do. Anybody want to argue with that? That's the way we do it. Exactly. I want to take as much off of you as I can, God. Exactly. Let's see. Oh yeah, I didn't finish my sentence. That is, remove the source of the distress and leave rebuke and discipline out of the process. I just don't need it. All right, now let's look at verse 6. I am worn out from groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears. That is a lot of tears. Nevertheless, as with many situations involving stress brought on by our actions, this is all brought on by sin. I think I told you that's the reason for rebuke and discipline in the first place. David is recognizing his sin. We're going to see it later. And he's coming to God, knowing he's going to get it. And he is grieved by it. When I used to have it written up here, mercy and tears seem to go together. When you're under heavy conviction, there's always a lot of, I won't say always, but tears can be a lot of it. And we may have to endure many sleepless nights. Have you ever had something you're worried about where you can't sleep? You might be worried about somebody else, but worry about yourself. Have you ever been concerned about yourself where you just can't sleep? And to David's point, he was groaning. It says he was worn out from groaning all night long. I flood my bed with weeping and drenched my couch with tears. Those nights come with tossing and turning in the bed, staring at the ceiling, maybe even pacing the floor, hoping for some relaxation to induce sleep. Of course, counting sheep is of no help, for it takes too long to derive any benefit from counting. In David's situation, the concerns are severe, for he is crying the whole night through. I had a night exactly like this when I was 10 years old. It's the night I was saved. Got caught stealing water guns from M.E. Moses over in Winwood Village. And I knew I was going to hell. And if you think, I've told this, given my testimony on that point before, and it always gets somebody laughing about it because of me talking about going back the second day to steal a big water gun, a water rifle. And I even went up to the front desk and told them I needed to borrow a big sack. And it gets a lot of laughter, but I'm going to tell you, my sin at 10 years old was just as devastating as David's sin at whatever age he is here. Sin is devastating. In David's situation, let's see. In David's situation, the concerns are severe, for he is crying the whole night through. His weeping is so intense that he uses terms like flooding and drenching his bed with his tears to describe his situation. This is the kind of behavior that comes from extended stress. He lays exhausted on his bed, almost to a point of hopelessness and defeat, the kind of hopelessness that goes with anguish. Let's look at 7 and 8. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. Away from me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. We eventually see the source of David's anguish is caused by the action of his enemies, but then since I wrote this, I changed my mind. When I wrote this originally, this is chapter 4 of a new book, which is rumored to be a new book. I haven't seen any evidence of it lately. It's about mercy, and it's about Psalm 6 is covered in it. And what I originally said was, when I wrote this, and I said it right to what I really believe, but I should have said it in the reverse order, I think. We eventually see that the source of David's anguish is caused by the action of his enemies, which is what those two verses are starting to say here. Away from me, all you who do evil, and the Lord has heard my weeping. But I go on to say this could very well be true, but David's actions could very well be bringing their evil deeds toward him. David is sick with his own sin. He's under deep conviction, is what I said. And he's in a weakened state. We're going to see what a really weakened state is when we get over to Psalm 38. But he's in a weakened state, and because of that weakened state, it makes him vulnerable, and his enemies are more prone to attack him. They've got a better chance of being successful when they attack him, and that's what he's talking about. He's faint, and the Lord has heard his weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts that's 9. My eyes, away from me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. All right, verse 9 says this: the Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. The end result of an expression of David's knowledge that God hears our prayers in the form we pray them. In other words, he knew God would hear and accept his prayer as a plea for mercy. It appears that David has successfully turned it over to God. That is all we can do. We go through all of this heavy conviction, and now he's down to the point where he's confessing, the Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. In verse 10 says, may all my enemies be ashamed and dismayed. May they turn back in sudden disgrace. Whoa, that's fast. Sudden disgrace. Trusting in God is where all of this should begin. It didn't begin there with David. He's like us, or we're like him. We start out with a little problem or a big problem, not realizing how big it can really become, and we want to handle it ourselves. And then we get to a point where we say, oh my goodness, that's it. I am stuck. And then we turn it over to God. And that's kind of what's happened with David. He went through all of that stuff back over there. I'll just point that verse out to y'all. You just got in here. But he said in verse 6, that I'm worn out from my groaning all night long. I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears. He is convicted of his sin. All right, so trusting God, in verse 10 there, trusting in God is where all of this should begin. We know David is a man after God's own heart. We know he trusts God and that he has trusted in countless situations before. But David is human, and with the weaknesses that go with the human condition, he turns it over with requests that his enemies be ashamed and dismayed, and they would turn back in sudden disgrace. He prayed the prayer, and he specified the desired outcome. We talked a little bit of that before you get in here. When we pray for mercy, we also give God a little direction on what we want him to do. We have the promise that perfect love casts out fear. The referenced fear is the fear that God will not respond in the way we desire. I don't know how many times I've said that up here when we talk about do not be anxious about everything over in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, I think it is. Don't be anxious about anything. What are we anxious about? Every person in here will say, God hears my prayer. Every person in will say, God will answer my prayer. And then, if I ask, why are we anxious then? What would you say? We don't think God's going to do it the way we want it done. If you are trusting in God and you're willing to live with the outcome, there shouldn't be any anxiety. If you say he's in control. The example I've given, I will probably give it many more times. I've been giving it for 30 years, is the one of the little boy with a broken airplane. He's trying to fix it himself. He fails. He takes it to his daddy, and he watches his daddy fumbling around, not being able to fix it. So in frustration, he grabs it away from his dad and takes it back. He couldn't fix it before. I don't know why he thinks he can fix it now, but he's going to fix it himself. And that's what we do with God. We say what Eva just said. I'm turning it over to you, God. Then we worry about it the whole time. What that means is you hadn't really turned it over to him. Because if you could turn it over to him, I don't think you would worry about it. If you could live with whatever his will turns out to be, we don't know what it is most of the time till after you're looking in your rearview mirror. So I prayed for my boys, every day of their life for many, many years, and I do still. Probably not every day, but I think about them every day, and I think about the times that their age mainly. You know, one of them, how old's Greg? Greg is born in '71, so that makes him 48, maybe. He's in his 40s. My other one's, born in '74, and they're coming to the age where I was an actuary, and I know that heart problems start to develop after 40. That's when your insurance rates start going up faster. I know that it's harder to stay employed after 40. I know that if you don't stay employed, it's harder to find a job after 40 or maybe after 50. Maybe 50 is the number. So all these things I think about all the time. And not all the time, but it's concerns that I have, and they never go away. Not that don't think, I don't have anything that I think that I could do about it. I just want them to have an easy life, you know? So David shed tears and more tears before he was able to finally turn his current problem over to God. It would have even been so much better for David if he had not waited so long before calling on God. However, that being said, it would appear that tears are the reasonably expected response to one's cry for mercy. You got a lot of tears in here, a lot of tears. And that seemed like a reasonable response.